It begins in silence, a silence so vast that even the wind seems afraid to move. The earth is locked beneath an endless shroud of ice. From horizon to horizon, glaciers stretch like ancient beasts asleep, their frozen backs glinting in the pale sunlight. The sky is gray, heavy with storms, and every breath of air stings the lungs like a knife. Temperatures drop to levels no human of our modern world could endure without layers of technology. Yet, tens of thousands of years ago, small bands of our ancestors stood in this world, facing the most brutal winters the planet had ever known. The Ice Age was not a single moment frozen in time, but an era of cycles, periods when colossal ice sheets advanced and retreated like slow, breathing creatures of stone and frost. Vast portions of Europe, Asia, and North America disappeared beneath walls of ice hundreds of meters thick. Rivers changed their courses, seas shrank and expanded, and the land itself trembled under the weight of glaciers that carved valleys and mountains alike. In these conditions, survival was not just a matter of strength, but of adaptation, instinct, and a constant dialogue with the unforgiving environment. For early humans, life was defined by the rhythm of cold. The world was raw and merciless. Snow blanketed every step, and even in daylight, the landscape shimmered with the ghostly glow of frost. Mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, cave bears, and saber-toothed cats roamed the frozen plains. To these ancient humans, Homo sapiens and their Neanderthal cousins, every day was a delicate balance between life and extinction. The hunt could bring food, warmth, and clothing, or it could end in death beneath a white storm. Scientists call this period the Pleistocene epoch, and within it, the last glacial maximum marked the most intense freeze, roughly 20,000 years ago. Evidence from ice cores and sediment layers tells us that average global temperatures were drastically lower, and in the northern latitudes, winter never truly ended. Forests gave way to tundra, grasslands hardened into permafrost, and entire ecosystems evolved to survive on the edge of frostbite. It was a time when the natural world was both beautiful and cruel, a masterpiece carved in ice and shadow. Imagine walking in their footsteps, the crunch of frozen snow underfoot, the sky dim even at noon, and the constant moan of wind moving through valleys carved by glaciers. Your breath would crystallize before your eyes, and the simplest act, finding dry wood, keeping a spark alive, or wrapping a child in animal hide, could mean the difference between life and death. There were no houses, no farms, no permanent shelters. Only caves, cliffs, and the stubborn courage of human hands. Every night was a gamble against the cold. But even within this desolate world, life refused to yield. Archaeologists have uncovered traces of warmth, blackened stones where fires once burned, charred bones of hunted animals, and the faint remains of hearths deep inside limestone caves. These clues whisper of early triumphs, of firelight reflecting on stone walls while families huddled together for heat, of laughter echoing faintly against the roar of the wind outside. To create and sustain fire in such a world was nothing short of a miracle. It was defiance made visible. The cold sculpted more than landscapes. It sculpted the human spirit. Each icy challenge forced adaptation. Muscles grew stronger, minds sharper, and cooperation became as essential as oxygen. In these long winters, the first roots of community and empathy began to grow. It was no longer enough to think of one's own survival. The group had to survive, the fire had to stay lit, the children had to live to see the next dawn. The Ice Age, in all its cruelty, became a forge that tempered humanity. Even the animals were teachers. Humans learned from wolves how to hunt in packs, from birds how to find shelter from the wind, and from bears the wisdom of patience and endurance. This bond between species, though primitive and fragile, marked the beginning of a greater relationship between humankind and the natural world, one built on observation, respect, and imitation. In a world where nature ruled absolutely, the only way forward was to learn its language. Yet, the cost of survival was immense. Many who walked this frozen earth never returned from the hunt. Entire clans vanished beneath avalanches or starved when prey migrated beyond reach. The cold preserved their bones in perfect stillness, silent witnesses to both tragedy and triumph. Their remains, discovered tens of thousands of years later, tell stories of resilience written not in words, but in scars, tools, and soot-stained cave walls. To enter the Ice Age is to enter a realm where every heartbeat mattered, where warmth was not just comfort, but salvation, where the faint glow of fire was the only boundary between life and the endless dark. It was here, amid glaciers and storms, that humanity learned its first great lesson, that survival is not about conquering nature, but about understanding it, bending, adapting, and enduring alongside it. The frozen world was merciless, but it was also the cradle of human innovation. In the silence of the snow and the roar of the wind, the first sparks of creativity flickered to life, sparks that would one day lead to civilization. But for now, the story begins with a handful of humans standing against the coldest night in history, their shadows trembling before the firelight, unaware that they were shaping the destiny of an entire species. The first true winters were unlike anything humans had faced before. The air itself seemed alive with hostility, biting deep into the skin and stealing warmth from every breath. Snow fell endlessly, blanketing entire landscapes in silence, and the once green valleys became oceans of white. In those early days, the cold was not just a season. It was a living force, invisible yet merciless, pressing upon every living creature. For small groups of early humans scattered across Eurasia and Africa, these first winters brought confusion and fear. The familiar world of warmth and abundance was fading, replaced by an unrelenting chill that threatened to erase their existence. They sought shelter wherever they could: caves, rocky overhangs, hollow trees, anything that could block the cutting wind. Nights of the hardest. The darkness was thicker, longer, and colder than any they had known. Families huddled together beneath the skins of hunted animals, trembling not just from the cold, but from the fear that they might not see the sun rise again. In this world of ice and shadow, every movement demanded energy, every mistake demanded a life. To survive, they had to evolve not only in body but in mind. The human brain, small and curious, began to search for patterns, for answers hidden in the frost. Then came fire. Perhaps it began with a bolt of lightning striking a dry branch, or two stones clashing by accident to create a spark. However it began, that moment changed everything. The first humans who dared to approach the flickering flame must have felt both awe and terror. Fire was alive, unpredictable, hungry, and bright. It could burn flesh as easily as it could warm it. Yet, those who learned to control it discovered the key to survival. Fire turned the night into day, transformed raw meat into nourishment, and pushed back the predators lurking in the dark. It was not just a discovery, it was a covenant between man and nature. In the coldest months, fire became the heart of existence. Around it, the air softened, and the fear that once ruled the night began to fade. Its warmth seeped into bones and spirits alike. For the first time, humans had a defense against the cold that was not made of fur or muscle, but of light. Archaeological evidence from sites such as Gesher Banat Yaakov in Israel and Zuccotti in China shows that ancient humans began using fire hundreds of thousands of years ago, and with it, their survival rate soared. No longer did they need to migrate endlessly in search of warmth. Now, warmth could be summoned by their own hands. The mastery of fire changed the human relationship with time. Before fire, darkness marked the end of activity, a command to rest, hide, or endure. After fire, the night became a place of gathering. Families and clans sat around glowing embers, sharing stories, plans, and fears. Language may have deepened here, forged in the rhythm of crackling flames and soft voices. The shadows that danced upon cave walls gave rise to imagination, the earliest form of storytelling. The firelight became a teacher, revealing faces, emotions, and gestures that shaped human empathy. But the road to mastering fire was not easy. Keeping a flame alive through freezing winds and snow demanded vigilance and skill. Sparks were precious, guarded like treasures. Early humans learned to build stone circles to protect their flames and to carry embers in hollowed-out bones or bark when traveling. Every clan had someone responsible for keeping the fire alive, a sacred duty, for without it, death would soon follow. The smell of smoke became the scent of safety. It clung to their hair, their clothing, their shelters, and perhaps even their memories. As generations passed, humans began to experiment, learning which woods burned brightest, which stones sparked best, and how to use dry grass and fungus as tinder. These early lessons were not written in books, but passed through the rhythm of daily struggle. Children watched elders strike flint and blow softly until the first orange glow appeared. Each successful fire was a moment of triumph, celebrated with quiet gratitude. It was proof that even in a world of cold and chaos, they could create life from lifelessness. Beyond warmth, fire changed how humans saw the world. It illuminated the unknown, pushing back the darkness that had ruled the forests for millions of years. It gave them control, a fragile but profound power. With fire, they cooked food, gaining more energy and fewer diseases. They hardened spear tips, expanding their hunting reach. They used smoke to keep insects away and light to drive back predators. Fire was no longer a tool. It was an ally, one that walked beside them through the ice age like a living companion. Yet the promise of fire also demanded respect. The same flame that gave warmth could destroy a shelter or consume a forest in minutes. Humans learned humility from it, the delicate balance between use and destruction. The flicker of light on a cave wall became a reminder of mortality. That warmth and death were never far apart. Fire was the first teacher of duality. It showed that creation and destruction are two sides of the same truth. As winters deepened and the glaciers crept southward, the bond between humans and fire grew stronger. It became the center of their world, a symbol of hope, endurance, and faith. When storms raged outside and winds howled through the caves, fire whispered of life. It was a promise that even in the darkest night, something could still burn. Those early humans, who once shivered in terror beneath the snow, now sat together, faces aglow, eyes reflecting the flames. The fear of cold had not vanished, but it had been matched by the brilliance of the human spirit. The first winters taught humanity its greatest truth. Survival is not a gift of strength, but of understanding. Through fear came discovery, through adaptation came mastery, and through the simple, trembling light of fire came the beginning of civilization. In the heart of that frozen world, a spark was born, one that would never die. The cold was endless, and even fire, as miraculous as it was, could not stand alone against the fury of the Ice Age winds. The early humans quickly learned that survival meant more than warmth. It meant protection. They needed a refuge, a place where the wind could not claw at their skin, where snow could not bury them alive, and where their fires could live long enough to see another dawn. The caveman's first true home was not built with tools or plans, but with instinct and desperation. Nature provided clues, the crevices in cliffs, the mouths of caves, the hollow bellies of fallen trees, and humans turned these into havens. In the beginning, it was simple, a dry space, a shield from the blizzard, a place to breathe without shivering. But soon, that simple need evolved into something far deeper, the birth of shelter as a symbol of safety, belonging, and family. Caves were the earliest fortresses of warmth. Across Europe, traces of soot and charcoal on ancient cave walls tell the story of humans retreating into the earth itself for survival. Inside, the temperature remained steadier, protected from the storms outside. The rock absorbed the day's weak heat and kept it through the night. Fires burned longer, smoke drifted through natural cracks, and the echoing walls became witnesses to whispered stories and laughter. For the first time, there was a place where the outside world, brutal, merciless, and wild, could be shut out. Within those stone bellies, humanity found its first sense of home. But caves were not always available. Many regions offered no mountains, no cliffs to hide in, and so humans learned to build. The earliest shelters rose from bone and hide, ingenious structures made from the remains of the great beasts they hunted. In the frozen plains of Eastern Europe, archaeologists have uncovered circles of mammoth bones arranged into dwellings, covered with animal skins stretched tight to keep out the wind. Inside, the floor was lined with straw, moss, and furs, and the hearth burned at the center, its smoke rising through a small opening at the top. These shelters were crude, yet extraordinary, a perfect fusion of necessity and creativity. The same creatures that once hunted man became the pillars of his survival. Each shelter told a story of adaptation. In the bitter cold of Siberia, hides were layered thick like walls of fabric. In milder regions, branches and mud were woven together to form huts strong enough to withstand storms. Even snow itself became a tool, packed into dense domes that trapped warmth inside. This instinctive understanding of insulation showed how observant early humans were. They studied how burrowing animals hid from the cold, how birds built nests to block wind, and they mirrored these techniques with their own hands. Every shelter was both a shield and a teacher. Inside, life unfolded differently. The space was more than just a barrier against the cold. It was a world of connection. Fire crackled at the center, lighting faces that glowed with orange warmth. The air smelled of smoke, meat, and earth. Children played quietly near their mothers. Elders carved tools or repaired hides, and hunters rested their tired limbs while watching the dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, the wind howled like a hungry beast, but inside there was stillness, the hum of human life holding firm against the storm. The contrast between the two worlds, chaos beyond the entrance and calm within, made the sense of home all the more sacred. For early humans, shelter became a symbol of survival and intelligence. It was no longer enough to react to the environment. They were shaping it. Every decision, where to build, how to position the entrance, how to manage smoke, came from experience passed down through generations. They learned to dig trenches to stop flooding from melting snow and to use animal fat to waterproof their hides. The smallest detail could determine whether a clan endured or perished through the winter. Over time, these shelters grew more refined, their designs spreading from one group to another like whispered secrets carried across centuries. The creation of shelter also marked the dawn of community. A cave or hut was rarely occupied by one person. It was shared, often by several families who pooled resources and warmth. This closeness gave rise to cooperation, empathy, and shared responsibility. When a wall needed repair or firewood ran low, everyone worked together. Within those small, smoky spaces, the foundations of human society were laid. The bond between individuals deepened, not out of luxury, but out of necessity. The warmth of the fire was nothing without the warmth of others. Beyond physical survival, shelters offered something less tangible but equally vital: psychological safety. To know that there was a place to return to, a space shielded from predators and frost, allowed humans to rest, dream, and think. It gave them time to plan hunts, craft tools, and tell stories. In that fragile calm, imagination flourished. Perhaps the first lullabies were sung within those walls, or the first myths were told while watching sparks rise into the night. These were not just shelters. They were cradles of humanity's emerging mind. The artistry of these spaces reflected an early sense of identity. Some groups decorated their cave walls with handprints, animals, and mysterious symbols, not just for beauty, but as a declaration: we were here. We lived. Those red and black markings, preserved for tens of thousands of years, stand as echoes of voices that refuse to be forgotten. In a world of chaos and cold, humans had found permanence. Stone and bone became their first architecture, and in that act, they claimed ownership over existence itself. By the end of each long winter, the shelters bore the marks of survival: soot stains, scratches, and piles of discarded bones. But they also carried something else: memory. The scent of smoke, the shape of shadows, the comfort of walls that once kept the storm away. As families packed up to follow migrating herds or seek new lands, they left behind traces of warmth for future generations to find. To enter such a space today is to step into the heartbeat of prehistory, to feel the echo of breath and fire that once defied the frozen world. The caveman's home was more than a structure. It was the first monument to human resilience. It stood as proof that even in a time when nature ruled without mercy, humanity found a way to carve out a space of safety, connection, and warmth. Against the roar of the Ice Age winds, those shelters whispered a simple truth that would carry through all of history: that home is not just a place. It is the promise of survival. Long before woven fabric or spinning wheels, warmth came from the bodies of the beasts that roamed the frozen earth. In a world where snow never melted and the wind carried the taste of ice, the naked human form was defenseless. The cold could kill faster than hunger, creeping beneath the skin until fingers stiffened and hearts slowed. To survive, humans learned to borrow the strength of the animals they hunted. Every pelt, every scrap of hide became more than protection. It became the second skin of humankind, a bridge between man and nature. In the earliest days, clothing was crude and improvised. Hunters draped the fresh hides of their kills around their shoulders, tying them with strips of sinew or plant fibers. These were rough garments, heavy, stiff, and often still carrying the scent of the animal's life. But they offered something priceless: insulation. The thick fur of mammoths, reindeer, and bison trapped air close to the skin, keeping warmth locked in even as blizzards howled outside. Over time, humans learned that layering hides improved their protection, and soft inner pelts could be worn beneath heavier outer coverings. The act of dressing became a form of strategy, a way of outsmarting the cold rather than merely enduring it. Archaeological evidence from sites like Dolny Vestinus in the Czech Republic and Kostenki in Russia reveals bone needles, awls, and hide scrapers, silent proof that humans had begun shaping clothing with intention. The discovery of these tools marks one of the great turning points in human history: the birth of tailoring. No longer content with draped hides, early people began to cut, sew, and fit garments to the human form. With each stitch, they transformed raw material into design, merging practicality with creativity. These are the first clothes not made for vanity, but for life itself. Each piece of fur or feather was stitched with survival in mind, and each garment told a story of innovation born from necessity. Feathers, often overlooked by the modern imagination, played an essential role. Birds thrived in freezing climates because their plumage trapped heat efficiently, and humans observed this lesson carefully. Some groups began sewing feathers into their clothing, lining the insides of hide capes or fastening them to the chest where warmth was most needed. It was an early form of insulation, light, effective, and ingenious. To see a caveman wrapped in furs, fringed with feathers, is to see the earliest form of human engineering, crafted without words or blueprints, guided only by instinct and observation. Preparing hides was grueling work. Fresh skins were thick with fat, blood, and sinew. Women and men alike scraped them clean with sharpened stones, stretched them over wooden frames, and smoked them over fires to soften the fibers. In some regions, brains were used to tan the hides, their natural oils helping to preserve flexibility. The smell was pungent, the labor endless, but the result was life-saving. A well-prepared hide could last through multiple winters, serving as both clothing and bedding. The sound of scraping hides became as common in prehistoric camps as the crackle of fire, a rhythm of work that echoed survival itself. As clothing evolved, so too did human expression. A simple pelt became a cloak, a piece of hide transformed into leggings or mittens, and bone needles gave rise to form-fitting designs. In some regions, Decorative touches appeared, beads made from bone, carved teeth, or colored ochre used to stain hides. These details were not just for beauty. They carried meaning. A decorated garment could signify a skilled hunter, a leader, or a person connected to spiritual rituals. Warmth and identity became intertwined. What began as survival slowly transformed into culture. Clothing also reshaped how humans moved through the world. Proper insulation allowed them to explore regions previously uninhabitable, pushing northward into the icy plains of Europe and Asia. Each new layer of fur and hide was a step toward dominance over the elements. Wrapped in their handmade armor, humans could follow herds into frozen valleys, fish in icy rivers, and sleep beneath open skies without freezing to death. The cold had once confined them, but now, dressed in the strength of their prey, they could roam freely. The balance of power between man and nature was shifting ever so slightly in humanity's favor. The act of dressing, too, carried ritual weight. Before hunts, some clans prepared their garments carefully, believing that wearing the skin of a certain animal granted its strength or spirit. Hunters might adorn themselves with feathers to move like birds, or with the pelt of a wolf to gain its endurance. These beliefs were not superstition alone. They reflected a deep respect for the animals that sustained them. To wear fur was to carry the essence of the creature's life, to walk in its warmth even after its death. In this way, clothing became not only physical protection, but also spiritual armor. Within the dim light of caves, families worked together to prepare garments for the coming cold. Mothers taught daughters how to sew stitches tight enough to hold back wind. Fathers passed down the knowledge of which hides to use for outerwear and which for sleeping mats. Children learned to handle bone needles and sinew, their small hands tracing the same movements that had saved their ancestors. These lessons were not written or spoken at length. They were embodied, repeated across generations until they became instinct. The first tailor garments changed more than comfort. They changed identity. Clothed humans no longer appeared as mere animals among animals. Clothing gave them a visible distinction, a layer of civilization wrapped around their flesh. It offered dignity in a world that otherwise reduced everything to survival. A well-made cloak was not just practical. It was a statement of triumph over the cold, a quiet proclamation that intelligence could conquer even the harshest environment. By mastering clothing, humans extended their control over nature's extremes. Every hide scraped, every stitch pulled tight, was an act of defiance against extinction. The cold had forced them to evolve, but in answering that challenge, they had created something entirely new, the idea of craftsmanship, of art born from necessity. From that moment on, the body was no longer at the mercy of the weather. It was protected by invention. And so, beneath the endless gray skies of the Ice Age, wrapped in fur, feather, and courage, early humans stood against the wind not as helpless victims, but as architects of their own survival. The world around them remained cold and merciless, but within their handmade garments, a quiet warmth endured, a warmth stitched from knowledge, faith, and the eternal will to live. When the first flames cracked through the darkness, it was as though the world itself had changed its shape. Fire was not just light and heat. It was the very heart of human survival. Before its discovery, the cold was a living enemy, biting into flesh, numbing limbs, and turning the breath of life in a mist that faded in seconds. But once fire came under human control, everything shifted. It transformed fear into warmth, night into day, and despair into resilience. The flickering orange glow became a symbol of power, the one force that stood between life and death during endless winters. No one knows exactly when or how humans first mastered fire. Some say it began with a lightning strike that set a forest ablaze, or when molten lava scorched the earth and left behind embers. What mattered most was not the discovery, but the taming of it. The earliest humans learned to guard those precious sparks, to feed them with dry grass, bark, and bone. They carried fire with them as they moved, sheltering embers and hollowed stones, or animal horns filled with ash, ensuring that the flame never died. For them, losing fire was like losing the sun. Without it, warmth, safety, and food all vanished at once. In the frigid ice age, fire became more than comfort. It was strategy. Camps were built around central hearths, and entire communities depended on the skill of keeping the flames alive. Men returned from hunting trips and laid frozen meat near the coals, watching as heat transformed raw flesh into something edible, safer, and softer. Women and elders gathered around the fires to dry furs and warm hides before sewing them into clothing. The smell of smoke clung to everything, their hair, their skin, their garments, but it was the scent of life itself. Even predators, once drawn to the scent of blood, now stayed back. Fire frightened them. Wolves, bears, and saber-toothed cats all hesitated before its glow. Humanity, for the first time, held something the wild feared. The dance of the flames brought people together. In the deep silence of winter nights, when snow piled high outside and winds howled like ghosts, the fire became a gathering place. Stories were born beside it, tales of hunts, of ancestors, of gods hidden in stars. The shadows that flickered against cave walls became the first cinema, where imagination painted pictures before sleeping eyes. Around these fires, humans learned to share food, pass knowledge, and comfort each other. In its glow, the first threads of community and culture were woven. But fire demanded respect as much as it gave warmth. It could be a friend one moment and a destroyer the next. The same flames that cooked meat and hardened tools could turn shelters into ashes if left untended. To master it required patience, attention, and ritual. Some groups treated the fire as sacred, never letting it die, feeding it carefully, speaking to it as if it were alive. The hearth became the heart of every dwelling, and its flame the soul of the tribe. Elders often taught the young that fire was a gift from the gods or from nature itself, a force to be honored and never taken for granted. Technological progress grew directly from this mastery. Fire hardened wooden spears, turning them from brittle sticks into weapons strong enough to pierce thick hides. It cracked open stones, making them easier to shape into blades. It helped create glue from animal fat and ash, used to bind tools together. In the flicker of the firelight, humanity's ingenuity flourished. The same hands that once struggled to spark a flame now used it to forge tools that changed their fate. Cooking, too, was a quiet revolution. Before fire, humans ate raw meat, tough, bloody, and often filled with unseen dangers. The discovery of heat transformed that meal into nourishment. Cooked food was easier to chew, easier to digest, and filled with new flavors. The process released energy that helped brains grow and bodies strengthen. Fire didn't just warm humans, it made them more intelligent. Each meal cooked over flame was an act of evolution, a step towards civilization. At night, the glow of multiple fires across the plains was a sign of life in a frozen world. Each spark marked a family or a clan, huddled together against the dark. The air filled with the crackle of burning wood and the hiss of sap turning to steam. Sparks drifted upward like stars escaping to the sky. For miles around, the wilderness shimmered with the faint hum of warmth and human presence. Predators watched from afar, confused by this new force, a light that neither moon nor stars could match, a light that moved and breathed like a living creature. Fire also provided protection in ways unseen. The warmth allowed people to sleep without fear of freezing to death. The smoke helped drive away insects. Even the ashes had purpose, used to dry hides, preserve food, and sometimes heal wounds. Every part of the fire's life cycle served its masters. It was not merely a tool, but an ecosystem of survival. Humans had entered a partnership with nature's fiercest element, learning to control destruction for the sake of creation. Yet the emotional power of fire was perhaps its greatest gift. To sit before the flames after a day of hunting or struggling through snow was to feel peace in a world that offered little of it. The light soothed the mind, eased exhaustion, and inspired thought. Many historians believe that art, language, and spiritual reflection were born beside the fire, when humans, no longer consumed by fear or cold, had time to dream. In the rhythm of the flames, they found the first sense of home. The legacy of those first fires still burns within us. Every time a match strikes, every campfire lit under a starlit sky, is a whisper from that ancient moment, when humanity claimed warmth in a frozen world and declared, "We will not die here." The cold may have ruled the earth, but fire ruled the human heart. And as long as it burned, the darkness could never truly win. When the cold descended like an unrelenting predator, the only barrier between man and death was what he wore. Long before the invention of woven fabric or metal tools, early humans turned to the world around them for protection, to the hides of animals they hunted, to the furs that once belonged to the creatures they feared. Clothing was not fashion, it was survival. Every piece of skin, every strand of fur stitched together represented a victory against the elements. The Ice Age demanded ingenuity, and from that demand came one of humankind's earliest and most vital inventions, the art of staying warm. In the beginning, clothing was crude but effective. After a successful hunt, nothing was wasted. Meat fed the tribe, bones became tools, sinew turned into thread, and hides became shields against the biting wind. These early garments were thick and heavy, stitched together with bone needles and sinew cords. The process of softening hides was laborious. Skins were scraped clean with flint blades, stretched, pounded, and sometimes soaked in animal brains or fat to make them supple. The smell was terrible, but the result was life-saving warmth. Each piece of clothing carried not only the warmth of the animal it came from, but also the memory of the hunt that had secured it. The earliest humans learned through experience that layering was key. Thick furs trapped air close to the skin, creating a barrier against the frost. Underneath, softer hides or grasses provided insulation. They wrapped their feet in animal skins, tying them with cords to prevent frostbite. They covered their heads and necks with fur hoods, understanding instinctively that much of the body's heat escaped through these areas. To step outside without full coverage was to invite death within minutes. Over time, these coverings evolved from random wrappings into intentionally crafted garments, cloaks, leggings, mittens, and caps shaped to the human form. But clothing was not merely practical. It carried meaning. The hides chosen, the patterns cut, even the way the fur faced, outward for protection, inward for warmth, spoke of knowledge passed down through generations. Some tribes decorated their clothing with beads made of bone or shell, or painted them with natural pigments. These markings were more than decoration. They were identity. They told stories of skill, clan, and survival. In a world without written language, a hunter's cloak could reveal his rank, his journey, and his victories. As the Ice Age grew harsher, humans became artists of adaptation. They developed tools designed specifically for sewing, awls, needles, and scrapers refined from bone and antler. The act of making clothing became a communal ritual, usually performed by women and elders near the warmth of the fire. The rhythmic sound of scraping, the soft tearing of sinew, the murmurs of shared stories, all became part of the human soundtrack. Children watched and learned, understanding that every stitch could mean the difference between life and death. The knowledge of how to tan hides, how to shape fur to fit the human body, was guarded and passed on like sacred lore. The variety of materials used reflected the environment. In colder northern regions, reindeer, mammoth, and bear hides provided the thickest protection. In slightly milder zones, deer and fox furs were common. Some even used bird feathers, woven into cloaks or a layer between hides for extra insulation, a technique inspired by watching how birds themselves survive the cold. Grass, moss, and plant fibers were added for lining, absorbing sweat and maintaining dryness. Every climate, every creature, offered its own lesson in how to endure. Humans, the great imitators, absorbed them all. Clothing also became a tool for mobility. to migrate, to hunt, or to build shelters, one needed to be able to move. The challenge was to balance warmth with freedom. Thick, heavy hides could trap heat, but they could also restrict agility. Over time, humans learned to cut and lace garments more efficiently, to create seams that allowed bending, twisting, and running. They understood the art of ventilation, loosening garments during exertion and tightening them at night. This fine-tuned awareness of body temperature management was not learned in comfort, but carved through generations of bitter cold and trial. For prehistoric humans, clothing blurred the line between technology and magic. Some tribes believed that wearing the skin of a powerful animal transferred its spirit to the wearer. Hunters wore bear or wolf pelts to gain courage and endurance. Shamans wrapped themselves in the feathers of birds, seeking the protection of the sky. These beliefs were not superstition in the modern sense. They were survival psychology, a way to feel unity with nature and strength in the face of overwhelming odds. The animal became a guardian, its life continuing through the warmth it provided. Even the maintenance of clothing was a ritual. Hides needed constant care, drying, oiling, and repairing. A torn garment could spell doom during a blizzard, so families dedicated time each evening to checking and mending their gear. Animal fat was rubbed into the skins to keep them waterproof and flexible. Needles made of fish bones stitched small tears, and sinew thread was replaced when worn thin. These acts were not optional. They were daily survival tasks, as vital as eating or finding shelter. The creativity of early humans shone brightest in their adaptability. When one source of material grew scarce, they experimented. They learned to braid grass fibers into ropes and weave reeds into mats for bedding and insulation. They even used layers of mud and clay in combination with hides to form semi-rigid armor against wind. Every mistake taught them something new, and every success was shared among tribes. The knowledge spread not through books, but through demonstration, through the quiet teaching of one generation to the next around the warmth of the fire. The results of these efforts were remarkable. Archaeologists have found Ice Age sewing tools that display precision and understanding far beyond what might be expected of so-called primitive humans. Some garments reconstructed from these discoveries would not look entirely alien to us today. Layered, stitched, tailored to fit, and adorned for pride. It was clothing that made it possible for humankind to move into colder regions, to hunt larger animals, and to settle where no creature without fur could live. When we imagine those early nights, the blizzard howling outside the cave, snow piling against the stone entrance, we can see them huddled together, wrapped in thick furs, sharing warmth through closeness. Their clothing wasn't just protection, it was connection. The hides held the heat of their bodies and the memory of every creature that had kept them alive. It was as though the world itself, animal, plant, and human, had woven together a single garment of survival. In those ancient winters, fashion did not exist, but function created beauty of its own kind, the beauty of endurance. Every stitch was a story of defiance, every cloak a shield against extinction. And in that long struggle with the cold, humanity discovered one of its defining truths, that creation, not strength, is the truest form of survival. When the world turned white and the wind howled like a living beast, the search for shelter was no less vital than the search for food or fire. Shelter was safety, the thin wall that separated breath from silence, life from ice. Early humans learned quickly that survival was not only about endurance, but also about cleverness, about knowing where to hide when the earth itself became an enemy. In a landscape ruled by cold, the first homes of humanity were carved not by design, but by necessity. Caves were the first refuge. To stumble upon one meant hope, a hollow in a mountain where the wind could not bite and snow could not reach. Inside, the air was still, heavy with the scent of stone and ancient dust. The darkness frightened many at first, for it was filled with echoes and unknown shapes, but necessity overcame fear. They learned to light fires at the entrance, filling the chamber with warmth and chasing away predators. Soot-stained walls bear witness to this. Blackened ceilings where flames licked the rock, creating the first smoky sanctuaries of humankind. Inside these caves, families found more than protection. They found belonging. The walls became their canvas, the hearth their heart. They arranged sleeping spots with furs and grasses, keeping children close to the fire while the outer edges of the cave were reserved for tools, bones, and supplies. In the flicker of firelight, shadows danced across the walls, and those shadows became stories. Animals leaping, hunters running, spirits watching. What began as simple survival soon evolved into something greater, the creation of home. Yet caves were not always available, and not every tribe lived near cliffs or mountains. In open plains or dense forests, early humans had to build their own shelters. Using mammoth bones, wooden poles, and animal hides, they crafted dome-shaped huts that could withstand fierce blizzards. The framework was strong, curved ribs of mammoth or reindeer forming a skeleton, covered with thick layers of skin and grass. Entrances were low and narrow, trapping heat inside. Smoke holes allowed fire to breathe without choking those within. These were not crude huts. They were masterpieces of adaptation, proof that ingenuity could flourish even when surrounded by deathly cold. The location of a shelter often meant the difference between survival and disaster. Clans chose areas shielded from prevailing winds, beside cliffs, within valleys, or near frozen rivers where fresh water could still be found under the ice. The positioning of fires, sleeping zones, and storage areas followed an unwritten logic born from generations of trial and error. Smoke was guided toward cracks in the ceiling. Animal fat lamps were hung on stones to reflect light deeper into the cave. The air was thick but alive, filled with warmth, murmurs, and the rhythmic breathing of those who had endured another night. Shelters were not only for the body, but for the spirit. In the depths of a cave or beneath the hides of a winter hut, the world outside faded. The howling wind became a distant whisper, the snow a memory. Here, humans felt, for the first time, what it meant to be separate from nature, yet still within it. They had carved a pocket of safety inside the chaos. This psychological barrier, the idea of inside and outside, was revolutionary. It allowed humans to rest, to plan, to dream. For the first time, life was not a constant struggle from moment to moment. Shelter gave them the luxury of time, to think, to create, to become. In many regions, Ice Age shelters revealed extraordinary resourcefulness. Archaeological evidence from mammoth bone dwellings in Eastern Europe shows complex designs, circular layouts with hearths in the center, carefully layered insulation of moss and fur, and even decorations made from skulls and tusks. These were not random arrangements. They reflected deep knowledge of wind direction, heat retention, and structure. The entrance often faced east, welcoming the morning sun, while the back remained sealed against storms. Within, furs softened the floors, and walls were lined with stored meat and tools. It was a small, self-contained world where every object served a purpose. But no shelter was perfect. The cold always found its way in, a whisper through a crack, a shiver that spread during the night. Maintaining warmth required constant attention. Fires had to be fed through the night, smoke had to be managed, and dampness had to be fought. Ice formed along walls, and snow crept through weak points. Some shelters collapsed under heavy snow. Others filled with smoke when the wind shifted. Every storm tested their craftsmanship, and every survival brought new lessons. Humanity learned not to fight nature directly, but to move with it, to read its moods, to build in harmony with its rhythm. As time passed, shelters became symbols of knowledge and continuity. The techniques for building them were passed through generations like sacred wisdom. Children learned where to find the best wood, how to lash bones for strength, how to stretch hides until they no longer leaked. The act of building was a ritual that united the tribe. When a new shelter was completed, families would gather around the first fire inside, offering thanks, not to a god of the sky, but to the earth that had given them another chance to live. The intimacy of those spaces also shaped human emotion. Huddled together in close quarters, people learned cooperation. They shared heat, food, and stories. They listened to the breathing of their kin as storms raged outside. Bonds deepened. Empathy grew. In that closeness, humanity began to understand love, not as a luxury, but as a survival tool. The warmth of another's body became as precious as the fire itself. Even after the Ice Age ended and the world grew warmer, the instinct to seek shelter remained. The huts and caves of the past became the ancestors of villages, then cities, then civilizations. But the essence never changed. The desire to build walls against the storm, to create space for safety and connection. Every modern home, every cabin in the woods, every tent by a campfire carries a trace of those first shelters. When we picture those ancient nights, the glow of fire painting stone walls orange, the hiss of wind beyond the entrance, we can almost feel it, the fragile miracle of warmth within the frozen world. They were not kings, not conquerors, but builders of hope. Their walls of bone and fur were more than shelters. They were declarations that even in the heart of the storm, humanity would endure. Hunting during the Ice Age was not merely a task. It was the heartbeat of survival. Every successful hunt meant warmth, food, and clothing. Every failure meant hunger, frostbite, and the slow, gnawing grip of death. In a world where the ground was locked in ice and plants slept beneath snow, early humans had no choice but to become masters of the hunt. The vast, white wilderness was both their battlefield and their teacher, and every creature that walked upon it became part of a delicate and dangerous equation between predator and prey. The frozen landscape shaped every decision. Hunters had to move silently through snow that could swallow their feet, through winds that erased tracks and chilled bone. Their eyes were trained to spot movement against endless white. A flick of fur, a dark shape against the snow, a distant cloud of breath. They studied patterns, the migration of mammoths, the grazing of bison, the dens of wolves, the paths of reindeer. These observations were not casual. They were learned through generations of hardship, passed down through words, gestures, and the deep memory of experience. The prey of the Ice Age were massive and powerful. Mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, and bison roamed in herds that could trample a man to dust. To face such giants required courage and intelligence, not brute force. Early humans did not hunt alone. Cooperation was their greatest weapon. Groups of hunters worked in silence, communicating through hand signals, reading each other's eyes. They planned ambushes, drove herds toward traps, or lured animals into ravines and mud pits. Spears tipped with flint or bone, sometimes hardened in fire, became extensions of their arms. Each throw was a gamble between nourishment and death. The cold made every hunt harder. Metal was unknown, and food spoiled slowly but froze fast. Hunters had to fight the wind and their own exhaustion. Frost could seize fingers mid-throw, and snow could blind their aim. But where hardship grew, so did innovation. Some tribes built temporary blinds out of snow and branches, hiding their scent from wary prey. Others smeared themselves with mud, fat, or animal blood to mask human odor. They learned the art of patience, sometimes waiting for hours, motionless, as the world around them froze. Smaller game was equally vital. While great hunts were rare victories, daily life depended on rabbits, birds, and fish. Nets woven from sinew or reeds caught waterfowl during migration. Simple traps of bent wood and hidden pits captured hares. Even insects, grubs, and small rodents were gathered when game was scarce. Nothing was wasted, and nothing was beneath notice. Every calorie mattered. Every morsel of fat or protein could sustain a body one more day against the cold. After a successful hunt, the work was far from over. The carcass had to be butchered quickly before scavengers arrived. Using sharp flakes of stone, they sliced through thick hide and tendon, separating meat, bones, and organs. The heart and liver were prized delicacies, eaten warm for strength. Fat was sacred, the richest source of energy. It was stored, rendered, and mixed with berries or roots to make dense, travel-ready food. Bones became weapons, tools, and needles. Sinew became thread. Even the hide was stripped, cleaned, and stretched to make clothing or shelter coverings. The concept of waste did not exist. Every kill was a transaction, life taken, life preserved. The hunt was also spiritual. Many tribes saw it as a sacred exchange between human and beast. Before a hunt, rituals were performed, dances, chants, or markings on the skin. Afterward, offerings were made to honor the spirit of the slain animal. Hunters whispered thanks, buried bones with care, or painted scenes of the hunt on cave walls. These acts were not decoration, they were devotion. They believed that by respecting the animal spirit, they ensured future success and avoided its wrath. The hunt was not conquest, it was communion. Some archaeologists suggest that this deep spiritual respect for animals shaped human morality. It taught empathy and restraint, to kill only what was needed to share food within the tribe, to recognize the balance between life and death. Around the fire, elders would tell children stories of the great mammoth spirit, the reindeer mother, or the hunter in the sky, beings who guided or punished based on the tribe's behavior. The cold may have hardened their bodies, but these beliefs softened their hearts, giving meaning to the struggle for survival. Hunting also strengthened social bonds. The coordination required for large hunts created unity and trust. Each person had a role. Trackers followed prints, drivers herded prey, throwers attacked from distance, and carriers brought the spoils home. When a hunt succeeded, the reward was shared equally. The fire that night burned brighter. Laughter echoed through the cave, and bellies were full. Food was not property. It was a symbol of collective endurance. A single kill could feed dozens, and in that sharing lay the roots of community. But not every hunt ended in triumph. Many returned empty-handed, frostbitten, or worse, never returned at all. The wilderness took its toll, and the Ice Age showed no mercy. When food was scarce, desperation forced creativity. Some scavenged carcasses left by other predators, breaking bones to reach the frozen marrow. Others followed wolves or saber-toothed cats, waiting for their chance to steal leftovers. Hunger erased pride, teaching a hard truth. Survival favored not the strongest, but the most adaptable. Over time, the tools of the hunt evolved. Spears became more refined, tipped with stone points carved with precision. Atlatls, spear throwers that extended range and power, appeared, giving humans a deadly advantage. Later came bows and arrows, allowing silent attacks from distance. Each innovation pushed the balance further in humanity's favor. With every improvement, their world expanded, from forest to tundra, from prey to predator, from hunted to hunter. Hunting shaped not only their bodies, but their minds. It required planning, memory, and teamwork. It sharpened observation and taught patience. It forced humans to imagine outcomes, to think ahead, qualities that later built civilizations. Every step through the snow, every heartbeat before a throw, was a rehearsal for the future of human intelligence. In the end, hunting in the frozen wilderness was more than survival. It was transformation. Each kill fed not only the body, but the soul, reinforcing the bond between human and nature. Every spear that flew through the cold air carried generations of knowledge, courage, and respect. And when the hunt was over, when firelight flickered against the meat hung to dry, humanity rested, knowing that for another day they had outwitted the cold and the hunger that stalked them through the endless white. When winter's breath howled across the endless plains and snow buried the earth in silence, shelter was not just comfort, it was survival itself. The early humans who endured the Ice Age learned that warmth could not be begged from the wind. It had to be built, crafted with patience and instinct. Every dwelling they created was a fortress against death, a fragile barrier separating life from the cold that sought to claim it. These shelters, made from bone, stone, and ice, stood as monuments to human ingenuity in the face of a merciless climate. The simplest shelters were caves, nature's gift to the weary. Carved by time and rivers long gone, they offered protection from blizzards, predators, and the biting cold. Inside, the darkness wrapped around the tribes like a blanket, broken only by the flicker of firelight dancing across the walls. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of animal fat burning, yet it was safer than the howling world outside. Over generations, these caves became more than refuge. They became homes, sanctuaries of warmth and memory. Walls bore the painted echoes of hunts, spirits, and ancestors, symbols of hope carved in ochre and charcoal. But caves were rare, and not every traveler had stone walls to hide behind. On open tundra, humans built with what the land offered. Massive bones of mammoths became the framework of survival. They arranged curved tusks into arches and ribs into walls, covering them with hides stitched tightly to block the wind. The bones, bleached white by sun and snow, formed ghostly shelters rising from the frozen ground, half house, half monument to the beasts that sustained them. Inside, fires burned low, and families huddled together beneath layers of fur, their breath rising in clouds that clung to the ceiling like mist. Where mammoths were scarce, people turned to the earth itself. They dug into the frozen soil, carving out pit dwellings to trap heat. The entrances were narrow and low, forcing anyone entering to crawl, which kept the warmth inside. The floors were lined with grass, moss, and animal skins, absorbing the chill from below. The walls were reinforced with stones, branches, and packed snow. These underground homes glowed faintly at night, small, living pockets of warmth beneath the vast, dead cold above. In the far north, some learned to shape ice into protection. Using blocks of hard-packed snow, they built domes, primitive ancestors of the igloo. Each block was cut with care, angled precisely so the structure held firm without collapsing. When a fire burned inside, the inner layer of snow softened and refroze, sealing cracks and strengthening the walls. The result was astonishing, a house made of cold that kept out the cold. It was paradox and perfection, proof that even the harshest element could become ally if shaped with understanding. Inside these shelters, life was close and intimate. Space was tight, warmth shared through proximity. Families slept side by side, often with their dogs curled against their feet for extra heat. Fires were the center of existence, their light the only sun during long nights. Stones encircled the flames to retain warmth, and food was cooked over them in clay or bone pots. The air was heavy with smoke, but the smell of cooking meat and melting fat meant safety, life, and endurance. Smoke holes were cut into the roofs when possible, but wind and snow often sealed them. People learned to manage the fire carefully, feeding it with dry dung, wood, or fat-soaked moss. Gathering fuel became a daily ritual. Children learned early how to keep the flame alive, a sacred task for when the fire died, the cold crept in swiftly. Some believed the flame carried a spirit of protection, and they whispered to it before sleep, treating it as both guardian and god. The walls of these homes told stories too. Furs and hides hung as insulation, softening both the sound and the cold. Tools were stored in stone niches, bones arranged neatly for crafting or ritual. The floor was divided by use, one area for sleeping, another for cooking, another for toolmaking. This organization revealed the dawn of structure and community, small signs of civilization forming within the ice. As months passed, the shelter evolved with the seasons. In summer, lighter tints of animal skins replaced heavy bone houses. These portable homes, stretched over wooden frames, allowed tribes to follow migrating herds. When the first frost returned, they rebuilt sturdier dwellings, each construction carrying the memory of winters past. The art of building became tradition, knowledge passed through generations by gesture and repetition. Children watched as their parents shaped bones and hides into warmth, learning that survival was both craft and inheritance. Beyond mere practicality, shelter carried emotional weight. It was safety, memory, and belonging. Returning to the same cave each winter was like returning to the heart of the tribe. Fires lit in the same spots as ancestors before them connected the living to the dead. Even in their harsh, short lives, these early humans built continuity, the sense that home was not just walls but people, warmth, and the rhythm of survival repeated across generations. During storms, when the world outside vanished in white, these shelters became worlds unto themselves. Inside, stories were told, songs were hummed, and children played with carved bone toys. The storm's howl outside became distant, powerless. Within those small spaces of heat and light, humanity endured, fragile yet unbroken, cold yet full of warmth. The Ice Age taught them that survival was not just about strength but creation. To build was to live. To shape the world into safety was to define nature's cruelty. In every bone dome, every carved cave, every flickering flame beneath the earth, there burned the first spark of architecture, community, and imagination. Those shelters of ice and stone were the earliest expressions of what would one day become civilization. Proof that even in a frozen world, the human spirit could build warmth out of nothing. Among all the forces that shaped the fate of early humans, none held as much power, mystery, and reverence as fire. It was more than light, more than warmth. It was life itself. In the frozen stillness of winter, when the world was wrapped in ice and silence, the fire's glow became the heart of existence. Around it, they cooked, gathered, dreamed, and survived. Without it, death was certain. Every flame that flickered in a dark cave or bone shelter was a fragile miracle, a tiny rebellion against the cold dominion of the Ice Age. Fire was never taken for granted. Each spark was precious, each ember sacred. To keep it alive through the long, endless nights was a duty passed down with near-religious devotion. The tribe's survival often depended on one or two chosen individuals, the firekeepers. Their task was both humble and divine, to ensure the flame never died. They slept closest to the hearth, their faces orange in the dim glow, eyes half open even in rest. Theirs was a vigil that could never end, for if the fire went out, rekindling it in a world of ice could take days, or might never happen again. In the earliest ages, before the mastery of spark making, fire was a gift that had to be found. Tribes followed the smoke rising from lightning strikes, carrying embers back to their camps in hollowed stones or wrapped in dry moss. Some even carried burning sticks for miles, shielding them from wind and snow. When they discovered how to make fire from friction or striking flint, it was not seen as invention. It was seen as revelation. They believed it came from the gods, or from the very soul of the earth. The act of creating it became ceremony, often performed by elders or shamans with chants and deliberate ritual. Once the fire was lit, maintaining it became a rhythm of life. Dried dung, animal fat, bark, and moss were all precious fuels. Every morning began with checking the embers, feeding them with kindling until the flames awoke again. At night, larger logs or bones were added to keep the heat lasting until dawn. The firekeepers' hands were always blackened, their skin cracked from heat and smoke. But they carried pride, because the fire's endurance meant the tribe's survival. Around the fire, the harshness of life softened. The flickering glow painted warmth on frozen faces. Shadows danced on cave walls, turning ordinary nights into theater. It was here that the tribe gathered after hunts, their bellies full and bodies exhausted, to share stories of courage and loss. The fire's crackle became a drumbeat to the rhythm of their words. It was the center of storytelling, where memories turned into myths and daily struggles became legends to pass on. But the fire's power was not only gentle. It was feared as much as it was loved. Children were warned never to play too close. A careless act could burn the home, the food, or the tribe's only light. Some believed the flame held spirits within it, souls of ancestors or gods who demanded respect. To feed the fire was to honor them. To neglect, it was to invite misfortune. The smoke that rose through the cave's mouth was seen as a message to the heavens, carrying both gratitude and plea. When storms came, The fire's battle became desperate. Wind screamed through cracks in stone walls, threatening to snuff out the glow. Firekeepers shielded the flame with their bodies, cupping hands around embers, blowing gently, feeding it bits of dried fat. They whispered to it, as if urging a child to breathe. When wood was scarce, they turned to bones soaked in grease. The smell was foul, but it burned long and hot. In those moments, every breath of heat was victory. Traveling tribes faced an even greater challenge. Fire had to move with them. They carried coals in stone containers or animal horns, smoldering gently under moss and bark. Each time they stopped to rest, the first act was to breathe life back into the coals, coaxing them into flame. Losing that ember during migration could spell disaster, forcing them to endure freezing nights until lightning or luck granted them another chance. The firekeepers' failure was unthinkable. Many tribes believed it would curse them for generations. The fire also defined the boundaries of safety. Beyond its circle, predators lurked: wolves, cave lions, and bears, their eyes glinting in the darkness. But even they feared the flame's brightness. For early humans, that circle of light was the first true fortress. It marked where human control began and the wilderness ended. The warmth became a barrier against not just the cold, but against fear itself. The fire taught them they could shape the world, however small their sphere of control might be. Over time, the mastery of fire transformed every part of life. It hardened wooden spears, cooked meat to be safer and easier to digest, and lit the path through endless nights. With fire, people ventured further north, deeper into the ice, expanding where human life could exist. It became the first tool that elevated survival into civilization. The fire turned caves into homes, meals into rituals, and fear into warmth. But beyond utility, it gave birth to something deeper: togetherness. Around the fire, isolation dissolved. Every flame pulled people inward to share warmth, stories, laughter, and silence. It became the first classroom, the first church, the first stage. In that flickering glow, humanity found its reflection. As centuries passed, fire remained sacred, even as its making became easier. It was no longer just a survival tool. It was memory, continuity, a link between past and present. Every spark still carried echoes of those ancient fire keepers who once sat in frozen darkness, cradling life in the palm of their hands. In their quiet vigil, they protected not only their people, but the future of humankind. Because as long as the fire lived, so did they. And as long as humans remembered how to tend it, no winter, no matter how cruel, could ever truly conquer them. When the cold became endless and the nights stretched into weeks of darkness, survival was not just a matter of food, shelter, and fire. It became a matter of spirit. Early humans learned that the bitter winters demanded more than physical strength. They demanded rituals that nurtured the mind, comforted the soul, and bound the tribe together. These were times when survival became woven into ceremony, and the smallest acts of life transformed into powerful symbols of endurance. The rituals of winter were born of necessity, but they became sacred traditions, an unspoken pledge that the tribe would face the cold together. Winter rituals began as survival strategies. Before the deep freeze, hunts and gatherings were planned with ritualistic precision. Groups would prepare special feasts after successful hunts, laying out meat, fat, and dried plants in order before the fire. These offerings were not just nourishment. They were thanks to the spirits of the hunt and to nature itself. Elders led the rituals, chanting and gesturing to guide the tribe, reminding them that survival depended on respect for the balance of life. These ceremonies created a rhythm to life, marking the passing of time through the long, silent months. Shelter itself became a stage for ritual. Inside caves or huts, the tribe gathered in the center, around the hearth, where warmth and light mingled. The fire was tended with care, each flame treated as a living presence. Before sleep, families might place tokens, bones, feathers, or carved stones, near the fire as offerings. These were gestures of hope, protection, and remembrance. Some tribes would decorate walls with paintings or carvings during these nights, turning their homes into sacred spaces filled with stories of ancestors and of survival. The shelter became more than protection. It became a vessel of shared history. Rituals also gave comfort in the face of uncertainty. In times when food was scarce and storms raged for days, the tribe gathered to share stories and songs. Elders told tales of great hunts, of animals that became spirits, of humans who endured unbearable cold. These stories were not mere entertainment. They were lessons, a way of teaching the young how to endure, how to honor the past, and how to believe in the future. Singing together, chanting, or performing dances by the fire strengthened morale. It turned fear into courage and hunger into unity. The ritual of clothing was another vital practice in the cold. Preparing garments for winter was not simply a chore, but a ceremony. Skins were cleaned, stretched, and stitched with attention and reverence. Women and elders often performed this task together, sharing knowledge, song, and prayer. They believed that clothing carried the spirit of the animal it came from, and the process of making it was a sacred act. To clothe oneself was to accept protection, to carry forward the life of the animal, and to honor the tribe's survival. Feeding rituals strengthened social bonds. Food was rarely eaten in solitude during winter. After a hunt or gathering, the tribe came together to share what they had, placing pieces of meat and fat at the fire's center. This sharing was an act of survival and of trust. Elders ensured fairness, reminding everyone that every mouth fed meant every hand strengthened. In that circle, food became more than sustenance. It became a ritual of equality and unity. Winter also brought rituals for marking time. With no calendars, no clocks, humans relied on the rhythm of the seasons. They observed the movement of the sun, the shape of the moon, and the patterns of the stars. Certain nights were marked by ceremonies, perhaps the first snowfall, the longest night, or the return of a particular bird or animal. These observances became a way of ordering life, a recognition that even in the coldest darkness, time moved forward. It gave hope that spring would return. Some tribes developed spiritual rites tied directly to survival. They believed that winter storms were controlled by spirits, powerful beings who tested their courage and endurance. To appease these spirits, rituals were performed, placing offerings of meat outside the shelter, singing to the wind, or painting symbols on cave walls. These acts gave meaning to the harshness of winter. They framed survival as a shared journey with nature, not a battle against it. The passing of knowledge became ritual itself. Winter nights were long and allowed time for teaching. Around the fire, elders instructed children in tracking, tool-making, and storytelling. These lessons were not just about survival skills, but about the values of the tribe: respect, cooperation, patience, and endurance. They passed knowledge as carefully as they passed down tools, seeing it as a gift that would keep the tribe alive through future winters. Even the simplest acts became part of ritual: lighting the fire, sharing clothing, distributing meat, repairing shelter. All were performed with deliberate attention. Each action was part of a larger ceremony of survival, a constant reminder that life in winter was fragile, precious, and collective. These rituals bound the tribe together, creating a culture of endurance that reached beyond survival and became identity. Winter rituals were the soul of prehistoric survival. They turned the harshest season into a time of unity, memory, and meaning. They transformed survival into a shared journey, a constant reaffirmation that humanity could endure. And in those long, cold nights, the rituals themselves became warmth. A fire kept burning in hearts and spirits, ensuring that even in the depths of the Ice Age, life could endure. In the unforgiving world of the Ice Age, clothing was not a matter of fashion. It was a matter of life and death. The bitter wind could strip warmth from the body within minutes, and snow could seep into flesh with deadly ease. For early humans, clothing became their armor against the cold, and making it was both an art and a necessity. They learned to turn animal hides, fur, and feathers into garments that wrap them in warmth, sheltering their bodies as effectively as caves and fires. In clothing, survival was stitched into every seam. Clothing began with instinct and necessity. The earliest garments were simple, skins draped over shoulders, fastened with strips of sinew, protecting the body from wind and frost. But winter demanded more. Over generations, humans refined their methods, developing specialized clothing designed to trap heat, shed snow, and allow movement. Layers became essential: furs for insulation, hides for windproofing, and softer skins for comfort. Clothing became a form of technology, adapted to climate and survival. Fur was the foundation. Mammoth, reindeer, wolf, and bear hides were prized for their thickness and warmth. Fur garments were carefully prepared, skins scraped clean, stretched, softened, and sewn together with sinew thread. Seams were tight to stop drafts. Edges were trimmed to reduce exposure. Clothing was tailored to the body: leggings for legs, tunics for torsos, hoods for heads. In some regions, they added fur-lined boots or mittens, knowing that frostbite often began in the extremities. This was clothing as protection, designed to defend life itself against the cold. Feathers became another remarkable tool. Light yet insulating, feathers were gathered, layered, and sewn into garments or bedding. Tribes that learned to combine fur with feathers created clothing of astonishing warmth. Feathers were also used inside sleeping mats or wraps, adding softness and trapping body heat. The act of collecting and preparing feathers was itself a ritual, a careful task performed during warmer months, so the bounty was ready when winter came. These garments became a fusion of nature's gifts and human ingenuity. Clothing was also a social and cultural marker. Certain garments or decorations signified rank, skill, or role within the tribe. Hunters might wear cloaks of patterned hides. Warriors might decorate with bones or painted markings, and elders might be distinguished by particular garments passed down through generations. Clothing was both functional and symbolic, telling the story of survival and identity. Each piece carried meaning beyond warmth. It carried history. The making of clothing was a communal task. Men, women, and children all played roles. Hunters provided hides and furs. Women cleaned and prepared them. Elders taught the stitching and patterning techniques, and children learned by imitating their elders. Tools were simple yet effective: bone needles, flint scrapers, and sinew thread. Every stitch was deliberate, every garment a testament to skill passed down through generations. This process strengthened bonds within the tribe, turning necessity into craft. Clothing also adapted to conditions. In deep winter, garments became heavier, layered with furs and lined with feathers. In transitional seasons, lighter hides and fewer layers allowed for mobility during hunts and migrations. Clothing was a living technology, adjusted, repaired, and improved over time. They learned to waterproof hides with animal fats, creating a barrier against wet snow and sleet. Such innovations were the result of centuries of experimentation, trial, and survival. Children learned the importance of clothing from a young age. They watched elders repair boots, sew new hides, and store garments for the coldest nights. Clothing was not just worn, it was tended. Garments were dried carefully near the fire, cleaned, and repaired before the next harsh night. This was survival knowledge stitched into the very fabric of the tribe. Clothing became part of the oral tradition, as elders explained the reason for each design, stitch, and material. Clothing was also deeply tied to identity and ritual. Before the longest nights, tribes might decorate garments with paint, beads, or feathers. Hunters would don special cloaks before a major hunt, believing such garments carried the blessing of the spirits. Winter clothing was more than protection. It was part of a ceremony, a way to honor life and the animals that gave it warmth. They believed that every garment carried the spirit of the animal it came from, and wearing it was an act of respect and survival. The innovation of clothing gave humans a decisive advantage over the cold. While nature shaped the climate, humans shaped their own survival. They learned to build garments that allowed them to endure longer, hunt farther, and live in harsher conditions. Clothing became an extension of their bodies, an intimate relationship between nature, necessity, and ingenuity. In the end, clothing in the Ice Age was more than fabric and fur. It was protection, culture, tradition, and survival woven together. Each garment was a story stitched in sinew and sweat, a shield against the silence of the cold. And every winter, as they wrapped themselves in these layers, they carried forward the legacy of resilience, proof that humanity could clothe itself in warmth even when the world was clothed in ice. For early humans, survival in the Ice Age was not only about enduring the cold where they stood, it was about knowing when to move. Migration became a lifeline, a strategy born of necessity, instinct, and knowledge passed through generations. The frozen world was in constant change. Herds of animals shifted with the seasons, rivers froze and thawed, storms altered the landscape. To follow food, water, and safety meant crossing vast, perilous distances through snow, ice, and endless white. These journeys were not random wanderings. They were deliberate expeditions of survival. Migration required careful planning. Before setting out, tribes would prepare clothing, sharpen tools, gather dried meat, and store fire-making materials. Elders and hunters studied the weather and the movement of prey. Routes were chosen with precision, following animal trails, river valleys, or mountain passes that promised shelter and resources. Migration was a collective decision, one that balanced risk and necessity. For entire clans, the choice to move was a pact, an agreement that survival depended on trusting the path ahead. The journeys themselves were dangerous. Ice could break underfoot, crevasses could swallow the unwary, and blizzards could erase tracks in moments. Food grew scarce as the tribe traveled, and every step carried the weight of uncertainty. Wolves, bears, and other predators stalked the edges of the journey, drawn to the scent of movement and warmth. Travel was a test of endurance, a battle between the fragility of human life and the unforgiving vastness of the frozen land. Herds of animals shaped the path of migration. Mammoths, reindeer, and bison moved in seasonal cycles, and humans followed them, knowing their survival depended on access to fresh meat, hides, and bones. Tracking these herds required skill and patience. Hunters watched patterns of tracks, the direction of wind, the condition of snow, and the sound of distant movement. Sometimes the tribe moved for days to follow a single herd, the journey itself becoming part of the hunt. In that way, migration and hunting were inseparable. Migration also demanded innovation. Portable shelters were built for travel. Light tents of hides stretched over frames that could be assembled and dismantled quickly. Fire-making kits were carried, often wrapped in protective hides to keep embers alive. Clothing was layered for mobility, with garments that could be adjusted for sudden changes in weather. Tools were designed for portability. Bone needles, flint blades, and compact spears were essentials. The tribe moved not as individuals, but as a living unit, carrying all that was needed to endure the journey. The act of moving bound the tribe in shared purpose. Each step was taken together, each danger faced collectively. Elders led the way, children learned by watching, and hunters scouted ahead. At night, camps were established quickly, fires lit, and shelters raised before the cold could settle in. These nightly halts were both rest and ritual, moments when the tribe reaffirmed their trust in each other and in the path they had chosen. Stories of travel and survival were shared, strengthening the bonds that migration demanded. Migration shaped the human mind as much as it shaped survival. It required planning, foresight, and memory. Knowledge of terrain, weather, and animal behavior became vital. Elders carried maps in their minds, and knowledge was passed orally. Routes, landmarks, and the lessons of past journeys became part of the tribe's heritage. Migration was not just movement, it was the passing of wisdom. Each journey was a chapter in the story of survival. The harshness of the Ice Age made migration both dangerous and essential. Some winters forced tribes to move hundreds of miles, crossing mountains, frozen rivers, and tundra plains. The reasons were survival itself, following the herds, escaping storms, or finding shelter. Migration was a gamble, a test of endurance that shaped the destiny of early humans. To stay was to risk starvation. To move was to risk everything, yet to hope for life. In migration, survival was redefined as a collective journey. It was not about a single individual enduring the cold, but about the tribe moving together through a hostile world. Each step was an act of courage, each campfire a victory against the frost. Migration became a lesson in resilience, teaching that survival was not static. It was movement, adaptation, and the will to keep going even when the way forward was uncertain. These journeys across the ice were the crucible in which humanity was forged. They tested the limits of endurance and built the foundation for the human spirit of exploration. Migration was survival in motion, a story written in footprints across snowfields and in the rhythm of countless footsteps taken together. For early humans, to move was to live, and to live was to keep walking into the frozen unknown. Survival in the harsh expanse of the Ice Age was never an individual pursuit. It was the work of the entire tribe. In the bitter cold, community became the cornerstone of life, a living network of cooperation, trust, and shared purpose. The frost was an unrelenting test, and the bonds between people determined whether they endured or vanished. In these frozen landscapes, survival was not only about shelter, fire, and food, but also about the strength of relationships, the unity of the group, and the rituals that bound them together. Community life in winter revolved around shared survival. Every member had a role. Hunters who ventured into the frozen wilderness, gatherers who searched for edible roots and moss, toolmakers who repaired weapons, and caretakers who tended to children and the elderly. Even the smallest contribution was valued. Children learned early that their safety depended on the collective effort of the tribe. From the youngest to the oldest, everyone's actions mattered, and everyone was part of the tribe's survival story. Winter amplified dependence on one another. Harsh conditions made every task harder. Hunting required teamwork, shelter building demanded combined strength, and food preparation called for cooperation. The cold meant that no one could afford isolation. Warmth was shared in the tight spaces of caves and tents. Meals were gathered around a single hearth, where firelight brought faces close, and conversations became part of the daily survival rhythm. Togetherness became survival itself. The social structure of tribes evolved to meet these challenges. Elders held respect as keepers of knowledge, of hunting routes, weather patterns, fire-making techniques, and rituals. Hunters carried prestige for their skill and courage, while gatherers earned respect for sustaining life when game was scarce. Cooperation extended beyond necessity. It shaped leadership and trust. In a world where the wrong choice could mean death, each decision was made collectively or guided by those whose experience earned them authority. Storytelling was central to social life. Around the hearth, voices wove histories, warnings, and lessons into the night. These stories were not entertainment alone. They were the education of survival, carrying knowledge of animal behavior, weather changes, and the art of endurance. Elders spoke of great hunts, of storms that tested the tribe's will, and of ancestors who had faced winters even harsher. The firelight became a classroom, and every story a survival lesson. Social bonds were reinforced through shared rituals. Festivals of thanks after a successful hunt, ceremonies for marking the change of seasons, and rites for welcoming children into the tribe all became part of life in winter. These gatherings created a sense of identity and belonging. They reminded the tribe that they were part of something larger than themselves, a living tradition forged in the cold. Social rituals were survival tools as much as weapons or clothing, strengthening unity in the face of relentless frost. Children played an important role in community life. Even in winter, games and imitation of adult tasks became their lessons in survival. They learned to track in the snow, weave sinew, mend clothing, and helped gather fuel for the fire. Play was practice, and the lessons learned in games would one day be matters of life or death. The cold shaped their upbringing, instilling resilience, cooperation, and respect for nature. The community's strength was tested most when winter became most cruel. Storms could trap tribes for days, forcing them to ration food and conserve warmth. In such times, unity determined whether they endured or perished. Leaders made difficult decisions, and elders reminded everyone of the tribe's shared history and purpose. Together, they faced the cold, drawing strength from shared work, stories, and belief. In this unity lay survival itself. Even conflict was shaped by winter's demands. Disputes over food or shelter were rare, for cooperation was a matter of survival. When tensions arose, they were settled quickly, often through discussion or ritual. Survival required harmony, and harmony required respect and sacrifice. The tribe was not merely a group of individuals. It was a living organism, bound together by the need to survive. Community life shaped identity and resilience. In the harsh silence of winter, it was the laughter of the group, the shared song, the passing of knowledge, and the warmth of the fire that defined existence. Together they endured storms, shared burdens, and celebrated survival. Winter forged them into something stronger than individuals, a collective will to endure. By weaving together cooperation, ritual, and shared purpose, the tribes of the Ice Age built something beyond survival. They built a culture of unity, where each member's strength became the tribe's strength. In the deepest cold, community became both shield and spirit, a living testament that survival was never the work of one, but of many. The winters of the Ice Age shaped humanity in ways deeper than mere survival. They forged traditions, skills, and knowledge that became the foundation of human culture. Every snowstorm endured, every shelter built, every fire kept alive, and every journey across ice and tundra was part of a legacy passed down through countless generations. These were not just acts of survival. They were lessons written into the bones of humanity, shaping the way humans lived, adapted, and thrived in an ever-changing world. Winter survival taught humans ingenuity. Facing relentless cold, they invented tools, refined clothing, built shelters, and developed strategies for hunting and migration. These innovations were not isolated achievements, but part of a collective heritage, shared and passed along as tribal wisdom. Fire-making, clothing construction, shelter building, and migration planning became rituals of knowledge, preserving skills that ensured survival long after each individual's life had ended. In enduring winter, humanity learned to endure itself. This legacy was preserved through storytelling. Around the hearth, elders recounted the struggles of past winters, the hunts that fed the tribe, and the storms that tested their courage. These stories became living memory, blending fact and myth into lessons for the young. Through narrative, survival knowledge was transmitted: which animals to hunt, where to find shelter, how to interpret the weather. Stories were not simply entertainment, but survival manuals, embedded in the culture of the tribe. The lessons of winter survival extended beyond tools and stories. They shaped human values. Cooperation became a principle, sacrifice a necessity, and respect for nature a way of life. In the face of the cold, the tribe learned that survival depended on unity. This understanding formed the basis of early human society, where individuals were bound by a shared purpose greater than themselves. Winter was not only a challenge, it was the crucible in which the earliest sense of community was forged. Survival also left a legacy of adaptation. Humans learned to read the signs of nature, track animals, conserve resources, and adapt clothing and shelters to the changing seasons. These adaptive skills became instinctive, forming the foundation of human resilience. Generations shaped themselves to the rhythm of the seasons, learning that survival was not a static state, but a continual process of change and response. The ability to adapt became humanity's greatest inheritance from the Ice Age. Winter survival created cultural traditions that endured. Rituals of thanks, clothing preparation, fire tending, and storytelling became part of the human experience. These traditions were not only practical, but spiritual, a way of honoring life, the natural world, and the ancestors who endured before. They wove meaning into survival, transforming struggle into ceremony and necessity into identity. In these traditions, the shadow of winter became a lasting part of humanity's story. The legacy of survival shaped migration and exploration. Tribes that mastered winter travel carried knowledge of routes, shelter, and sustenance across landscapes. This knowledge became a shared heritage, allowing human groups to expand into new territories. Winter was not only a time to endure, but a teacher of movement, a force that drove humans to explore, adapt, and expand the boundaries of survival. The frozen world became a map of lessons for future generations. Even art and expression bear the mark of winter survival. Cave paintings, carvings, and ornamented garments often depicted hunts, animals, and symbols tied to survival and ritual. These creations were not merely decorative. They were expressions of experience, memory, and belief. They encoded survival wisdom in image and form, turning the harsh realities of life into stories and symbols to guide future generations. Winter survival became an enduring cultural legacy, etched in stone and bone. The lessons of winter extended into the human spirit. To endure the cold was to develop patience, courage, and creativity. Winter taught humans to work together, to value knowledge, to respect the environment, and to find warmth in both fire and fellowship. This legacy of endurance became a defining part of what it meant to be human, a testament to the strength of cooperation, tradition, and imagination in the face of nature's greatest trials. Ultimately, the legacy of winter survival is a story of transformation. It was a time when humanity learned to turn adversity into innovation, isolation into community, and survival into culture. The fires kept alive in bone shelters, the clothing stitched from hides and feathers, the songs sung in the darkness, all became part of humanity's inheritance. Winter was not merely endured. It was lived, learned from, and passed forward. In that legacy lies the story of humanity's resilience, a story written in frost, fire, and the unyielding will to survive. The story of how early humans survived the harshest winters is more than a chapter of history. It is the origin of humanity's enduring spirit. The lessons learned in bone shelters, around hearth fires, and under endless nights of frost became part of the foundation of human civilization. The struggles of the Ice Age shaped not only the way humans lived, but also how they thought, adapted, and passed knowledge forward. These winters left an inheritance of resilience, ingenuity, and unity, a legacy that continues to influence humanity today. The endurance of fire, shelter, and clothing became the first great achievement of human survival. Fire became a constant companion, not just a tool, but a symbol of life itself. Shelters evolved from caves to constructed dwellings. Clothing became increasingly sophisticated, and rituals embedded survival into culture. These innovations were passed down, forming a chain of knowledge stretching across generations. Winter survival was not an isolated challenge. It was the forge that created the adaptive human mind. The spirit of adaptation survived long after the Ice Age ended. Humans carried the lessons of clothing, shelter, fire, and cooperation into new climates and environments. Tribes migrated further, explored wider lands, and carried survival skills into landscapes as challenging as the frozen steppes they once knew. The strategies of survival became part of humanity's blueprint, proof that adaptation was not just a skill, but a defining human quality. Winter was the teacher, and humanity learned the lesson well. The rituals of survival became cultural inheritance. Stories told around fires, songs sung in long nights, ceremonies honoring hunts, and practices of clothing preparation endured as traditions. These were the earliest forms of culture, carrying with them both practical knowledge and spiritual meaning. They became a living legacy, a bridge between generations. The fire kept burning, not only in caves, but in memory, and this flame became the heart of human identity. Winter survival shaped cooperation and community. In the face of adversity, humans learned the value of working together, of sharing knowledge and resources, of protecting each other. These social bonds became one of humanity's greatest strengths. Communities became more than survival groups. They became the foundation of societies, built on trust, cooperation, and shared purpose. The Ice Age taught that survival was collective, and this lesson became a cornerstone of human civilization. The human story carried forward the memory of winter's past. Art, music, oral traditions, and rituals retained echoes of those early struggles. Cave paintings of hunts, songs that honored the fire, and garments adorned with meaning became testaments to the ingenuity and spirit of survival. These were not just memories. They were guiding principles, reminding each generation of where they came from and how survival had been achieved. Winter was etched into the soul of humanity. The endurance of the human spirit is the most profound legacy of winter survival. It shaped the way humans approach challenges, adapt to change, and find warmth in connection. Every innovation, ritual, and journey of the past became part of an unbroken chain leading to the present. The flame that ancient fire keepers tended in the coldest nights still burns today, in human courage, ingenuity, and unity. As humanity faces its own challenges, from climate change to global survival, the lessons of the Ice Age remain relevant. Adaptation, cooperation, innovation, and the ability to transform adversity into progress are still at the heart of human endurance. The story of how cavemen survived the coldest nights is not just a tale of the past. It is a living guide for the future. The legacy of winter survival is not frozen in time. It continues to shape who we are and who we can become. The fire of survival, once kindled in the darkness of Ice Age caves, has become the enduring flame of humanity. It is a flame of knowledge, tradition, community, and resilience. And as long as humans carry that flame forward, there will always be hope, even in the coldest night.